Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to be talking about vaccines and exactly what they are and what they involve. I'm going to talk about the different types of immunity that you can get. So not just that taken from vaccines, but we're going to be looking at words like artificial, active, passive and natural and explain what those terms refer to also. So we've got here a picture of a guy and a definition of what a vaccine technically is. So it's an injection of a weak or dead pathogen designed to stimulate an immune response. So immune response means our sort of immune system. So our white blood cells that are involved in fighting against disease, it's designed to stimulate those. But we need to talk about some of the key words here, and one of them that I've mentioned in that definition is pathogen. So let's talk about what a pathogen actually is. So we'll move this over, because what I've got here are a few of the definitions I'm going to be referring to. So a pathogen, this first one here, is an organism that causes disease. So this could be, we could just draw here, very rough, a little bacteria, a little tail. It could be a virus, or just draw a little viral particle here, not very well drawn, but it's just for a bit of a visual. So it could be a bacteria, a virus, but a pathogen is an organism that can cause disease. And what we're doing with the vaccine is injecting a weak or dead version of that. So when I say weak, what we mean is it's been attenuated. Now attenuated means made less harmful. So it's a weakened version, or dead, in which case it may have just been heated to a very, very high temperature to kill it. But you could also use a product of the pathogen. So if the pathogen produces a particular toxin, you could also give that and it would still bring about the same response. So a vaccine, an injection of a weak or dead pathogen, which is an organism that causes disease, designed to stimulate an immune response. So let's draw on very roughly. Let's imagine that we're getting an injection here. Clearly not the best picture, but imagine we're just going to give someone an injection, let's say into their shoulder, into the muscle of the shoulder, the deltoid. I want to talk about what that actually does to the body. Now, on the surface of that pathogen, so whether, let's say it's a virus particle, so you're having a vaccine against a particular virus. What you do is you give them a sample of this virus, and on the surface of that viral particle are these things called antigens. Now, antigens are substances which stimulate an immune response. So it's specifically the antigen that the body is responding to. And the reason why you're trying to give a vaccine, so the whole purpose of this is to get the body almost used to what the disease is, to provide long-term protection. By giving a weak or a dead version of it, you kind of build up your protection so that if the real one comes along, you can fight it much more effectively. So you give this injection, and antigens on that pathogen will trigger the response. Now, quite simply, when the body recognises that antigen, it causes a whole cascade of events. We're not going into massive detail in this video about them, so we're just going to get to the main point. What happens is the activation of the white blood cells. Now, white blood cells are those designed to fight against infection. And these white blood cells, we'll just draw one here. These white blood cells do a variety of things. So we're going to imagine that here is our viral particle with little antigens on the surface. Let's just imagine these little spikes are antigens. This white blood cell, so put a W for a white blood cell in the body, can do a few things. It can go and engulf that pathogen with the antigens on, a bit like Pac-Man, it just goes to engulf the whole thing. Or it can secrete these. Now these chemicals that I'm referring to are antibodies. So white blood cells can actually start to produce antibodies, and they are blood proteins which target specific antigens. So every antigen has a specific antibody that will target it. So the white blood cell could either engulf it, or it can secrete these antibodies which would lock on and destroy those antigens. Now, once those antibodies have destroyed those antigens, those antibodies for a short period of time will remain in the blood. But something more interesting happens. These white blood cells can form into what we call memory cells. And these memory cells remain in the blood so that if, on a real occasion, someone were to contract the virus, the harmful version of the virus, they would already have memory cells in their body that recognise it, that know which antibody specifically they need, so that they can fight it very quickly before even symptoms start to appear. So let's look at a typical graph to help explain exactly what's going on. So here we've got perhaps a poorly drawn scale, but we're just going to do a very quick sketch of a graph. We're going to imagine that time, I'm doing a blue, time's on the bottom, and up the side what we have would be, if we just imagine we put antibody concentration in the blood. So we're going to talk about how many antibodies are in the blood. Now when you give somebody a vaccine, a weak or dead version of the pathogen, their body will start to fight it, they'll recognise it, the white blood cells will be produced to engulf them or secrete antibodies, and our antibody level would rise. It would rise significantly. Now we would fight that infection, but then because we don't want our body in a full sense of sort of attack, our antibody level then would become low. But it never reaches zero, it then just remains a little bit higher. It stays above the zero level because we have some antibodies staying in the blood. And remember, we have memory cells which remain in the blood, and the memory cells are able to produce those antibodies readily. So that if we get another infection, if we get a proper infection as opposed to being given deliberately a vaccine of something, our antibody level now can rise much more steeply and much more readily, because we can get more into the blood to fight it before we come truly under attack. Now this part here, the moment we give a vaccine to protect someone, this is called the primary immune response. So the primary immune response is at this point here, the moment that our body starts to respond to that vaccine. At the point here, when our antibody level then re-rises, that would be our secondary immune response. It's the response that our body has to the second time we are exposed to that particular pathogen. And it's much more effective. Antibody levels in the blood are much, much higher. So ultimately, that is it. That is what vaccines are. They are injections of pathogens, a weak or a dead form, designed to really get the body used to fighting by secreting white blood cells, or producing white blood cells that will secrete antibodies to be able to fight it, and produce memory cells or white blood cells that can choose that antibody that will stay in the blood should they be exposed to it a second time. What we're just going to talk about are these four terms. These four terms that we often associate or hear when we think about immunity. And not just vaccination, but just immunity in general. And I want to talk you through what they mean and give you an example of them. So active is when the body actually mounts a response. So what we've done when we've given a vaccine is make the body mount an immune response. Our immune system has responded. So vaccines are an active thing. Passive is when the body simply acquires immunity without having to activate all of our B cells, our white blood cells that I've been referring to. Then there are two other terms, natural and artificial. Natural is when we obtain immunity through natural means, and artificial, as it says, is when immunity is provided externally. So we've done something, we've given something externally to somebody to make them immune. So we're just going to think of some examples. So if I were to just draw our little needle again from before to represent giving someone a vaccine, then vaccines could be seen as active but also artificial. So we call vaccines active artificial means of immunity because we are mounting a full response and we're giving it via an external means, via a syringe, for example. Breastfeeding, on the other hand, if we just draw a little baby here, that's meant to represent just a little baby. And we'll draw the mother in. Breastfeeding is passive, however. This is an example of passive immunity because the baby will get antibodies in their blood simply through the mother's milk. But it's also natural because it's passed from mother straight to baby. So you can see that we can use the two of these four words at any one time. So vaccines are active artificial, breastfeeding is passive natural. So if we just think of two other examples, I've got here a very bad drawing of a snake. Now I think of when you get bitten by a snake, if it's a venomous snake, it will inject you with its venom. And to counter that, you would need an anti-venom. That's an antitoxin. Now, when you give an antitoxin, your body isn't making any immune response. You're not making any B cells or antibodies to fight it. You're really just giving something to cancel out the toxin. So antitoxin, or giving an antitoxin, is an example of something that is passive because it's not going to mount an immune response, and artificial. So we've had active and artificial with a vaccine. We've had passive and artificial through means of an antitoxin. We've had passive natural through breastfeeding, which only really leaves one left. So if we just draw our vaccine, a virus particle from earlier, this is to represent just straightforward, simple infection. Just catching a straightforward infection like a virus would be active because it would typically bring about the response, and natural because your body would naturally go to produce antibodies to fight that virus. So here are the four types of immunity we can have: active, passive, natural and artificial, and four examples of things that can fall under two categories. So vaccines at the top here as active artificial, breastfeeding as a means of natural passive immunity, giving an antitoxin as a means of passive artificial immunity, and general infection as a means of active natural immunity. Okay, hope that helps.